It was a serene Friday afternoon in Pasadena, California, with the golden sun casting its final rays over the city, painting the streets with long, soft shadows. Elijah Carter, a 41-year-old visionary entrepreneur, stepped out of his car near one of the many branches of Western Gateway Bank, a financial institution he had painstakingly built from the ground up. Known for his innovative approach to community banking, Elijah wasn't here for any high-profile meeting or executive task today. He was dressed simply, in a hoodie and jeans, ready for what he thought would be a quick stop to pick up some documents he had left earlier in the week. Elijah wasn't the type to flaunt his status. For him, substance mattered more than appearances. As he entered the branch, the familiar hum of activity greeted him. The soft murmur of customers talking, the rhythmic clatter of keyboards, and the occasional beep of machines processing transactions. He gave a friendly nod to the security guard, his sharp eyes briefly scanning the room. The branch was just one of 25 under his ownership, a space that should have reflected the values of respect and inclusion he had infused into his company. At the back of the branch, the manager on duty, Allison Parker, exuded authority in her tailored blazer. Her sharp features and no-nonsense demeanor made it clear she ran a tight ship. But as Elijah approached the front counter and greeted a young teller, asking to retrieve his documents, Allison's attention was drawn to the interaction. She paused her conversation, her expression shifting as she assessed the man in the hoodie who didn't look like her usual high-value clientele. Without waiting for the teller to respond, Allison strode to the counter, her heels clicking on the polished floor like a judge entering a courtroom. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, her voice cold and clipped. Her tone made it clear she wasn't offering help so much as questioning his right to be there. Elijah responded politely, "Yes, I'm here to pick up some notarized documents I left earlier this week." Allison's sharp eyes narrowed. "I don't recall seeing you here before," she said, crossing her arms. "Do you even have an account with us?" Her skepticism was palpable, and her words weren't just dismissive. They were laced with an air of superiority. Elijah maintained his composure, offering a calm and measured reply. "I've been banking here for years." But Allison wasn't convinced. Waving off the teller, she declared, "I'll handle this. Sir, if you're looking for basic services, I'd suggest visiting one of our larger branches. This location is primarily for higher-tier clientele." Her words carried an edge, one that wasn't lost on Elijah. It wasn't just about his attire or demeanor. It was about assumptions, the kind that came from deeply ingrained biases. Elijah could feel the weight of the stares from other customers behind him, their curiosity piqued by the growing tension. He didn't let it rattle him. Instead, he smiled faintly and said, "I understand, but my documents should already be here. If you could just check under the name Elijah Carter, it would save us all some time." Allison's expression hardened, her eyes scanning him again, as if searching for a flaw to validate her assumptions. "Elijah Carter?" she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "We don't normally hold documents for customers unless they have premium accounts. Are you sure you're at the right branch?" The room grew quieter. Even the tellers behind the counter seemed to pause their work, sensing the rising tension. Elijah remained unfazed. "I'm quite certain this is the branch I use." Allison let out a humorless laugh. "Check for his name," she instructed the young teller, her tone dismissive. "But I highly doubt we have anything here. We're not a storage facility for misplaced paperwork." The teller hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but obediently began typing into the system. Meanwhile, Allison stepped closer to Elijah, lowering her voice. "Look, sir," she said, her condescension unmistakable. "We have policies in place for a reason. If you're not in the right account bracket, there's no way we can accommodate special requests like this. Maybe next time, consider upgrading your status before coming in." Elijah felt the heat of the moment, but refused to let her words provoke him. He simply folded his arms and waited, giving her the opportunity to reveal her ignorance. After what felt like an eternity, the young teller finally spoke, her voice timid. "Actually, Mr. Carter's documents are here. They were marked for secure pickup." Allison's head snapped toward the teller. "What?" she barked, her composure momentarily slipping. "Yes," the teller replied. holding up a neatly labeled folder with Elijah's name printed clearly across the front. For a brief moment, Allison seemed frozen. Then, with flushed cheeks, she snatched the folder and handed it over begrudgingly. "There you go," she muttered, unable to meet Elijah's gaze. Elijah took the folder with his usual calm demeanor, but couldn't let the moment pass without addressing it. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. "But just to clarify, was there a reason this process needed to be so complicated?" Allison stiffened, her defenses rising again. "We have to ensure security and verify credentials," she said, her voice tight, "especially when dealing with certain clientele." Elijah's expression didn't waver, but her words stung more than she realized. It wasn't about security, it was about judgment. Judgment based on assumptions rather than facts. And Elijah knew it was time to confront the issue, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been treated unfairly in moments like this. As the weight of the situation hung in the air, Elijah began to consider his next move, knowing this was about far more than a folder of documents. It was about challenging a mindset that needed to change. The room was heavy with an uneasy silence as Allison tried to regain her composure. Customers, tellers, and even the security guard looked on, their curiosity growing as they realized something significant was unfolding. Elijah stood still, his calm demeanor unshaken, but the flicker of disappointment in his eyes was unmistakable. Allison, still clutching the folder, seemed unsure of how to salvage the situation, yet her tone remained defensive. "Sir," she began, forcing a strained smile, "we follow the same protocols for all our customers. There's no need to take this personally." Elijah studied her for a moment, his silence louder than any words he could have spoken. He knew this wasn't just about the folder or the exchange. It was about what her behavior represented. Letting out a measured breath, he finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. "I appreciate the concern for protocol, but let's be honest. Was this really about policy, or was it about something else?" His words hung in the air, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Allison's forced smile faltered as she glanced around, suddenly acutely aware of the growing scrutiny from both customers and staff. She opened her mouth to respond but hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I understand," Elijah continued, his tone unwavering, "that security and verification are important, but what just happened here went beyond that. It felt less like due diligence and more like an assumption, a dangerous one at that." Allison's cheeks flushed a deeper shade of red as she shifted uncomfortably, her carefully constructed aura of authority beginning to crumble. Mr. Carter," she stammered, still holding onto the folder like it was her last anchor. "I truly didn't mean to offend. If my actions came across as—" Elijah held up a hand to stop her. "Intent matters," he said, his voice calm yet resolute. "But so do actions. And your actions today demonstrated not just a lack of respect, but a judgment that had nothing to do with policy and everything to do with perception." The customers in line began murmuring softly, some nodding in agreement. A middle-aged man near the front of the line crossed his arms, his expression hardening as if Elijah's words were giving voice to his own past experiences. The young teller who had located the documents looked down at her hands, her discomfort evident, but there was also a glimmer of quiet validation in her eyes. Allison, now visibly flustered, took a step back, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her blazer. "Mr. Carter, I didn't realize." "Exactly," Elijah interjected, his tone sharpening slightly. "You didn't realize. And that's the heart of the problem." He took a deliberate step closer, his presence commanding without being aggressive. "Do you know how many people walk into this branch every day, expecting fair treatment, only to be met with the kind of dismissiveness I experienced just now? People who don't have a title or a business card to prove their worth. How many leave feeling humiliated because of a snap judgment made by someone who thinks they don't belong?" Allison's lips parted, but no words came out. She glanced around the room, her gaze briefly meeting those of the customers who were now openly watching her with a mixture of disapproval and curiosity. Elijah softened his tone, but the weight of his words remained. "This isn't just about me. It's about every single person who walks through these doors. No one should have to prove their worth to be treated with basic dignity." Not here, not anywhere. A faint murmur of agreement rippled through the room. An elderly woman near the back of the line nodded, her weathered face reflecting quiet solidarity. A young man in a hoodie similar to Elijah's stood a little taller, as if the words had struck a chord with him personally. Allison, now visibly humbled, lowered her gaze. I understand, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Carter, I truly apologize. It wasn't my intention to make you, or anyone else, feel disrespected. Elijah studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. I'll take your apology at face value, he said, his voice steady. But apologies only mean something when they're backed by change. The room remained silent, the gravity of his words sinking in. Elijah turned slightly, addressing the customers and staff who were still watching intently. Moments like these are about more than just one person or one interaction, he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. They're about how we as a community choose to treat one another, whether we see someone for who they truly are, or for who we assume them to be. His gaze swept across the room, lingering briefly on the young teller who had helped him. She offered a timid but grateful smile, her posture relaxing slightly now that the tension was no longer solely on her. It's not just about policies or procedures, Elijah continued. It's about mindset. It's about stopping ourselves from making assumptions that can hurt or demean someone else. And for those of us in positions of authority, it's about using that power to lift others up, not to push them down. Allison nodded slowly, her expression a mixture of regret and determination. You're absolutely right, Mr. Carter, she said, her voice steadier now. I see that, and I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. I hope you do, Elijah replied, his tone measured, because respect shouldn't be conditional. It shouldn't depend on what someone is wearing, where they're from, or what their title is. It should be given freely, because everyone deserves it. The room buzzed softly with murmurs of agreement. A man in a worn jacket at the back of the line spoke up, his voice carrying a quiet strength. It's about time someone said it. We've all been there. Looked down on because of how we look or what people think we can't do. Elijah turned toward him, offering a warm smile. Exactly, he said. It's something we all need to work on, not just in this branch, but in our everyday lives. With that, Elijah turned back to Allison, his expression softening slightly. I'm not here to make an example of you, Allison, but I will be watching. This branch, every branch of this bank, needs to operate with fairness, transparency, and respect. And that starts with how you treat every person who walks through that door. Allison nodded, her posture more reflective now. Understood, Mr. Carter. Thank you for giving me the chance to do better. Satisfied but still resolute, Elijah stepped back, the weight of the moment settling over the room as he prepared to leave. As Elijah turned to leave, he paused briefly, glancing back at the room that had fallen into an almost reverent silence. The weight of his words still lingered, but he knew the moment required something more, something that could ignite real change beyond the walls of this single branch. He stepped forward once more, this time addressing the entire room with the quiet authority of someone who had nothing to prove but everything to teach. Before I go, he began, his voice steady but inviting, I want to leave you all with something to think about. The customers and staff alike shifted their attention fully to him, their gazes expectant. Even Allison, who had spent the last few moments looking at the floor, now lifted her head, her expression a mixture of humility and curiosity. When I started Western Gateway Bank, Elijah continued, it wasn't just to provide financial services. It was to build something different, something better. I wanted to create a place where every person, no matter who they are or where they come from, could feel seen, valued, and respected. A place where fairness wasn't just a promise, it was a practice. A middle-aged man in a faded jacket nodded subtly, his arms crossed as if drawing strength from Elijah's words. A young woman near the teller's counter leaned forward slightly, her eyes intent, as though she were hearing a truth she had long needed to believe in. But that vision, Elijah said, his gaze sweeping across the room, isn't something I can accomplish alone. It takes every one of us, employees, customers, community members, to make it real. Because respect isn't just about policies or procedures. It's about the choices we make every single day, the way we speak to one another, the assumptions we challenge, the dignity we extend, not because someone has earned it, but because it's what they deserve as a human being. A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. The elderly woman who had spoken earlier gave a small nod, her hands resting lightly on her cane. A younger man in a hoodie stood a little straighter, his expression thoughtful. Elijah let his words settle before continuing, his tone growing even more personal. The truth is, we've all been Allison at some point. We've all made assumptions about someone based on how they look, what they wear, or where they come from. I know I'm not perfect. I've had to check my own biases more times than I can count. But the question isn't whether we've made mistakes. It's whether we're willing to learn from them and do better. Allison's posture shifted slightly, her arms no longer crossed defensively but resting at her sides. Her face was etched with a mixture of regret and determination, as though Elijah's words were striking a deeper chord. This branch, Elijah said, his focus briefly shifting to the staff, has an incredible opportunity. You're not just tellers or managers or security guards. You're the first impression for every person who walks through those doors. You have the power to make someone feel valued or dismissed, and that power shouldn't be taken lightly. The young teller who had helped locate Elijah's documents nodded slowly, her cheeks flushing slightly as she looked down at her hands. Elijah gave her a small, reassuring smile before addressing the room once more. To the customers here today, he said, his voice warm but resolute, thank you for your patience and for witnessing this moment. I hope it serves as a reminder to all of us, myself included, that we have a choice in how we treat one another. Whether it's in a bank, at a grocery store, or on the street, every interaction is a chance to show kindness, respect, and understanding. The room seemed to breathe as one, the collective weight of the moment settling in. A young woman near the back of the line raised her hand slightly, her voice soft but steady. Thank you for standing up and saying what needed to be said, she said, her eyes shining with quiet gratitude. It means a lot to all of us. Elijah nodded, his smile gentle. It's not just about standing up, it's about what we do next. Change doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens in the moments that follow. With that, he turned back to Allison, his expression firm but forgiving. Allison, he said, I meant what I said earlier. I'm not here to fire you or make an example of you, but I do expect you to take what happened today to heart. This isn't just about one mistake. It's about setting a standard for yourself and your team moving forward. Allison nodded, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. I understand, Mr. Carter. I promise I'll do better. Not just for you, but for everyone who walks through those doors. I hope you will, Elijah replied, his tone softening slightly. Because this bank, and every branch under its name, was built on the idea that respect isn't something you earn. It's something you give freely, because it's what every person deserves. The customers began murmuring softly, their expressions a mix of admiration and reflection. Elijah turned to address them one last time, his voice carrying a quiet strength. As you leave here today, I hope you'll carry this lesson with you. Respect costs nothing, but it has the power to change everything. Let's create a world where we see each other for who we truly are, not for who we assume each other to be. With that, he stepped toward the door, his movements unhurried yet purposeful. As he reached the exit, he glanced back one final time, catching Allison's eye. She was already speaking quietly to her team, her posture less rigid and more thoughtful. Stepping out into the warm sunlight, Elijah felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, not from asserting his authority, but from knowing he had planted a seed of change. He didn't need applause or validation. What mattered was the impact, the ripples that moment would create. As he walked to his car, Elijah reflected on the encounter. Change, he knew, wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about the quiet, persistent work of challenging assumptions, holding others accountable, and choosing respect in every interaction. This wasn't just a lesson for Allison or the staff at Western Gateway Bank. It was a lesson for everyone who had witnessed it, including Elijah himself. Every moment, he thought, is an opportunity to treat others with dignity. And those moments, small as they may seem, have the power to reshape the world.